Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the final session of the Carnegie Connection 2024. It has been a fabulous 3 days, and for those of you that have been with us in and out throughout the past 3 days, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for attending this final session, which we were as a group just discussing how this topic is applicable across so many levels right now, the topic of trustworthy leadership. And it couldn't be more timely, I think, with some of the things happening in our world, and are just so happy to have you all here. So I am here with Emma Jones, who is the Executive Vice President at Credo. And we are thrilled to have her here talking about trustworthy leadership. Before we jump in, I want to go over just a couple of brief housekeeping items. One is that this session is being recorded and that our sessions will be available to you at the end of next week. So if you're looking to share these out with anyone, you will have that capability towards the end of next week. I would also like to share that if you have any questions throughout for Emma, who is our speaker, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A bubble. It's the two talking bubbles that go back and forth. And that's where you should throw any questions instead of throwing it in the chat or the Woohoova app. This will be an easier place for me to see it. And we'll cover those at the end. Emma has promised we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. And then wanted to share with you, if you do have questions or any trouble throughout this session and you want to email our team at Carnegie, you can message us at conferences@carnegiehighereducation.com, or you can put it in the Woohoova app under Ask Organizers Anything. And of course, this final session, or if there's anything from today that you would like to share out and tag Carnegie or to hashtag the connection, please feel free. We would love to see your comments and anything that was valuable takeaways for you all over this session or any of the others that you've attended. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Emma. Emma, thank you so much for being here. We are thrilled to have you. And I can't wait to learn from you. And I know that there are many others feeling the same way. So I will turn it over to you and we'll get started.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. It is fabulous to be here with you. I keep wanting to say Friday afternoon. We're not quite there yet. It is Thursday afternoon. It's the end of this conference. And I'm so pleased that we get to close out with this topic. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope that you find it to be valuable as well. So as was mentioned, I'm Emma Jones. I'm the Executive Vice President at Credo. We're a higher education consulting firm that focuses on strategy with campuses, student success and retention, campus space and place, and leadership. And this trustworthy leadership conversation really has emerged from all of our work with campuses and leaders on campuses all over the country. And that's what we're going to spend our time on today. So I wanted to start with sort of what is the state of trust in higher education? What does that look like? We could spend a lot of time here, but I wanted to just sort of a brief look at the fact that, unfortunately, in terms of the public narrative, higher education is really losing ground. I'm sure that you all look at higher education news media like I do every day, and we are seeing headlines like this all over the place, right? Is college worth it? Only 36% of Americans have confidence in higher education. Public opinion is mixed. Is college worth it? You should really think about these things before you go. I know that many of you on the call today or on this webinar are in marketing. You're thinking about how you message your institution. And we know that this national narrative is really hard to combat, right? So we know we're losing ground there a little bit. And I'll just tell you that the FAFSA crisis did not help us, right? As we are looking at what's happening with the public narrative, this huge debacle with FAFSA over the past year was really challenging. This was a quote from an article in Inside Higher Ed this spring. And this was a person on campus who said the damage done to the foundational trust in FAFSA and in the financial aid system in general won't just impact this class. It will trickle down. I'm afraid this is going to have a long tail, and we're only just seeing the effects. Now, we know that the FAFSA crisis was well outside of the control of anybody on this call. It was outside of the control of our sector. But the blame, if you will, largely fell on higher education's shoulders. So we have this as sort of an impacting factor in terms of how the country, how the public is thinking about the value of higher education and of getting a degree. So why does it matter? This is a really important question. Why does trust matter? Because higher education is in a constant state of change. We are responding to all of these challenges around us. We are in the middle of really significant changing demographics for our campuses, changing needs for students, a changing business model, and all of those things are impacting the work that you're doing on your campus every day. And what we know is that navigating change requires a lot of trust, particularly in a people-focused sector like higher education. And we're going to come back to that. That's really where we're going to spend some time today. So what are the challenges with trust? One, as we just said, it's critically important when you're navigating change. You need that in an environment. But in our experience, as we spend time on campuses all over the country, trust is often in short supply. So many different reasons for this. This can be because of challenging leadership transitions, because of work that was meant to happen that didn't go very well, because of changes that weren't experienced well or implemented well on campus. And so it's so important and it's lacking. That's really a challenge for us. Trustworthiness is consistently identified as a key competency of leadership, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, when Academic Search released a recent study that they did. They surveyed 700 presidents, and those presidents lifted up trust as the #1 most important competency for post-pandemic leadership. It was right at the top of a list of really important competencies for leadership. And so we see this continually be right at the top of lists like that. But I'm really fascinated by this, by the fact that trustworthiness does not always equal being trusted. And that's because, I think it is because of this, trust is often defined as something that's built between individuals, between people, right? One on one. But we work in organizations, and organizations come with baggage. And we have to figure out how to have trust at scale in our organizations. It's really challenging to do. Trust can also feel like a nebulous idea. I mean, what are we really talking about? I mean, if you had to rattle off a definition of trust, I think it might take all of us a minute to go, well, really, I mean, I think I know what trust is, but what do we really mean? What are we talking about? And one of the challenges is that we might not be talking about the same thing when we bring it up. There was a study that was done on a campus in the last couple of years where the researchers asked leadership how they thought about trust. And leadership talked primarily about how they were sharing information, what they were sharing with faculty and staff, what they were sharing with the campus community. And when they asked faculty and staff what they thought about trust, faculty and staff talked about being trusted to make decisions in their area of responsibility. A fundamentally different positioning in terms of the first thing that we bring to the table when we think about trust. So if we're not even having the same conversation, how do we build it, right? How do we build that really well? So when we think about trust and the role that it plays in navigating change, I want to spend just a little bit of time here introducing you to a model that we find to be really helpful when we are working with colleges and universities as they think about strategic change, about moving forward. I mean, I will tell you, any strategic plan on a campus in this country today is a change plan. Being static is not an option. Ways that institutions are working to transform student success is all about change and evolution. And so when we think about any of those important things that happen on campus, it is typically within the context of change. So we really love this model by Lippitt and Noster, and they identified a series of elements that were necessary to experience success through complex change. So first, they said you have to have vision. You have to have clarity on direction and a clear and compelling why. People have to know why they're doing the work. You also need skills. This is the ability of the people in your environment to execute against the change that's needed. Are they skilled up? Do they have the tasks and the tools and the expertise that they need? 3, you need resources. Financial often comes up, but I think human resources, time resources, capacity resources also fall into this bucket. You also need an action plan. How are we going to get from point A to point B? And what's the pathway that's going to get us there? What are the milestones that are going to help us understand that we're experiencing success and momentum? And finally, Lippitt and Noster pointed to incentives. This can be financial incentives, but I really think about this one more as it relates to people understanding what the benefit is to them, how it connects to their purpose, how it connects to what's important to them, sort of what's in it for me. Why would I engage in this work? What's going to get me connected to it? So Lippitt and Noster said if you have all of these things, you can experience alignment and success through change. Credo's adaptation of this model for higher education is to add trust. Because again, in a people-focused sector, even if you have all of these other things, but trust is lacking in an environment, it can be challenging to really move through that change in effective ways. So what happens when you are missing some of these components in your environment when you're thinking about undergoing all of this change? If you don't have incentives, if people don't know what's in it for them, you'll get resistance. Well, why would I engage, right? Why would I get involved in that? If you don't have an action plan, you have a whole bunch of really smart people who are going to probably try to do some good work, but you might have a lot of false starts because you're not achieving the goals that you needed to because you didn't articulate a pathway. I want to say as I go through this that you can think about this as an institution-wide model. I also see a lot of value in this in individual units in different areas of campus as well. If you don't have resources, can you imagine how people react? They're frustrated. I know why. I have the skills to do it. I know what our pathway is, and I know what's important in this for me, but I can't do it because I don't have the time, capacity, financial resources to get it done. If people don't have the skills that they need, you'll see anxiety in your environment. We are all seasoned professionals or even new professionals, right? We have a love for the work and we really enjoy being in it. And it is hard for good professionals to be in a space of conscious incompetence, knowing that you don't know everything that you need to know to be successful. And this is a challenge I think that's increasing on campuses as technology continues to evolve. If you don't have a vision, if there's not clarity about the why, people will be confused. Why are we doing all of this? To what end? Where are we going? Why is this important? And what we find on campuses where trust is absent is that people tend to disengage. This is when people will say, you know what, I'm just going to go back to my office and do my work because I don't know what's happening out here. I'm just going to retreat, right? And not engage with the big picture, not be connected to the vision, not look at where we are going. That can be a really challenging place. So how do we not end up in that situation? Or how do we fix that situation if we're in an environment where trust is lacking? I want to talk about these 4 factors of trust that can really help nurture a culture of trust and build momentum towards change. I'm going to say also, as I talk about this, that, we started our conversation here thinking about what's happening in the landscape. Uh, and I really believe that in order for us to effectively address these big national, economic and social issues that are impacting our sector, we have to start internally. We have to understand how we build trust in our own communities, in our campus communities, in order to bring that conversation then to build trust with our audiences and change that public narrative. So I really want to talk here about campus culture and momentum as we undergo all of this change. So there's a book called 4 Factors of Trust. It's sitting right here on my desk. And I really love this model and how the authors thought about how you sort of break down trust, right? We talked about trust as sort of a nebulous idea. Well, in this model, we would say that transparency is one of the 4 factors of trust. This is the continual sharing of information that impacts people. Does that make sense to you? Right? When you think about one of the ways that trust is built, you want to know the information that's meaningful to you. So this is the first one here that we want to talk about. So some recommendations here when you think about transparency in your environment as you're building trust is to share as much as you can, as often as you can, more than once. All of you marketers on the webinar here today know that you cannot say something once and expect that everybody has heard it and taken it in. You have to say it over and over and over again, right? So we want to make sure that we're sharing information that is meaningful as often as we can and not assuming that everyone received the message the first time. This second one is incredibly important. You want to build education and context into information sharing. So if information is being shared on campus or within a particular area, but the people don't understand the context around what's being shared, then the desired impact on trust will not be achieved. I think a great example of this that we see a lot in campus environments is when leaders are sharing financial updates with campus. Really important. More and more leaders are working to be really as transparent as they can be about the financial health of their institution and what that looks like. But if the audience receiving that information doesn't understand what a discount rate means, doesn't understand how you can use an endowment, doesn't really understand the difference between a budget and cash flow in higher education, then that information may land a little bit flat. It's just information. It's not necessarily helping the community understand how they can engage most effectively in being a part of the solution. And third, I'm sure that many of you have these, build a communication rubric to guide how you share information. What are all the right questions that you need to be asking when you're sharing information to make sure that you've covered all of your bases? Who's going to be impacted by this communication? How do we speak with them first? How do we address the impact that's going to be created on a particular group or audience on our campus? Let's make sure that we talk about that. What are we not sharing and why? I think that's a really important question as you think about a communication rubric. Why wouldn't we share this information? What's the compelling reason to keep this behind closed doors? And if there's not a good answer, then maybe you include it. Maybe you put it out there because the more information people have, the more helpful they can be. The second factor of trust is capability. This is the observable skills required to deliver on promises. So we saw skills up in that model for complex change, right? That people have to be skilled up in order to really successfully navigate change. In this context, we're talking about people being able to see that skills exist in an environment in a way that allows you to really deliver on the promises that you've made. A couple of recommendations here when you think about capability. Evaluate those skill gaps and invest in development efforts to close them. We are in a moment where we all need upskilling with some regularity. And so when you look at your environment and think about the changes that you're trying to make, you have to ask the question, have we actually upskilled our teams, our faculty, our staff, our systems in order to approach and address the change that we want to make? Second, empower the middle and put them at the table. One of the really amazing things that we saw during the pandemic, along with all of the challenge of that period of time, was that so many decisions had to be made so quickly that the hierarchical structures in our institutions became much flatter. They needed more people at the table more often to make decisions and move really quickly. In that flattening, we saw really extraordinary talent emerge on campuses all over the country. In our middle leader level, our deans, our directors, all of these folks who do extraordinary work, who translate strategy to daily interactions with students, they were at the table being a part of the decision-making process. And it demonstrated extraordinary capability for colleges and universities. What we have started to see here in our post-pandemic era is those hierarchies start to stratify again, where we are no longer seeing as many people at the table to make decisions. And it's a huge worry for us as we think about the capacity of campuses to undergo and navigate change, to lose those really important voices at the middle of the institution. So as much as possible, we want more voices in the decision making. Third, streamline systems and processes to clear the way for impactful work. We all know that quote. Lost my place here. We all know that quote, you fall to the level of your systems, you don't rise to the level of your goals. And that we really see this impacting campuses when they're trying to work through challenging change initiatives. If you have software that doesn't talk to each other, if everything is disconnected, if your data is not integrated, people are going to say, well, you're asking us to do this, but I can't get what I need. Or I don't have access. I don't have connectivity in the way that I need to really be impactful. So how can you streamline systems and processes in your unit at the institutional level to really clear the way for that most impactful work? The third factor of trust is reliability, continual delivery on promises made. What are we looking at there? This is where you get to tell the story over and over again, right? So if you're being transparent and sharing information, you have the skills in your environment and you're demonstrating that you can use those, this is where you get to say, hi, everyone, this is what we are accomplishing. You always want to show how far you've come when you're going through really big change initiatives. I think it's incredibly easy for people to forget, to only look at here's what we haven't accomplished, or to look forward and say, here are all the things that we still have left to do. But it's really easy for everyone to forget to look back and go, you know what, we've done extraordinary work over this past 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. One of the things that I like to do when I'm doing strategic plan updates at Credo is to talk about all of the amazing people and the incredible initiatives that we didn't have and weren't doing when we started the plan. And it's always eye-opening for people to remember that we really have come a long way. Even if you haven't been able to accomplish everything that you wanted to do, you have been able to make some progress. And related to that, you want to celebrate every win and course correct your failures. I'm telling you all, every win in this environment is a big win, and it is worth lifting that up. So, in small ways, in big ways, how can you acknowledge the contributions of people on your campus, the contributions of your students, the outcomes that you're achieving through the work? Every way that you can bring that to the table and celebrate that. And also, really explicitly name when things don't work and say, here's what we learned from that, and here's what we're going to do differently going forward, absolutely contributes to a sense of trust and engagement across the campus. The fourth factor of trust is humanity, a really important one. This is the recognition of the uniqueness of each person in your environment. This is where it gets challenging, right? Because when we think about trust being built between individuals, but the fact that we operate in organizations, we have to think about how we address humanity at scale. And that's really hard, right? That is absolutely challenging work to do. But some of the things that we see being really valuable here is to constantly ask that question: who does this impact, and how will we address that impact directly? Every time something changes, every time something new comes to the table, somebody's work is impacted. Somebody's livelihood, something that somebody cares about, is impacted by that. And I know that you have people in your environment on campus who have that mindset of really thinking about every individual person and understanding what that impact is going to be. You want those people at the table helping you make some of these decisions and helping you think about the right questions to ask and the right way to address impact to different populations. Care for mental health and well-being. I think this exists at multiple levels. There's sort of a systemic, organization-wide care for mental health and well-being that is so much more of a demand now than it was pre-pandemic, as we continue to see rates of mental health challenges rising, not only for our students, but for our faculty and staff as well, and a real emphasis on well-being, a real demand from employers across the country. This is not just in higher ed, to have a more significant focus on the well-being of their employees. This is a really important piece. So I think that's systemic, but I also think that every unit, every office has the opportunity to lean into mental health and well-being for their teams. And I will say one of the most important things in that is that if you have a team, if you are overseeing a team, you have to model it. You have to model care for yourself, model your own approach to well-being, and to have that be an explicit part of the conversation that you're having with your team. And again, as we think about the uniqueness of each person, everybody is going to need something different, which leads to my last point, which is really about, as we think about humanity, addressing the uniqueness of each person and building trust in our environments, we have got to shift our mindset to center equity and not equality. I cannot tell you the number of times that we still come across mostly policies and procedures on campuses that are built around the same result for everyone versus built around meeting everyone where they are and making sure that they have what they need for us all to get to the same outcome. I imagine you can think about some of these policies or procedures on your campus. And this is a tricky spot because it can be when you're meeting everybody where they are, which is equity, right? You're giving everybody what they need, which might be a little bit different. That can be perceived as unfair. So there are also ways in which this needs to be really explicit and right in the front to say we are focusing on making sure that everybody has what they need for us to achieve the same outcome. And we're not going to approach that pathway exactly the same for anybody in our environment. So as we think through all of this, what I want to leave you with, and then have lots of time for questions and conversation, is that in an environment of change, which we are in higher education, and for all intents and purposes can assume we will remain in that state of change, that if you can build trust as a foundational part of navigating that change, it can make all of these other areas so much more powerful and so much easier to access. if you can sort of unlock that trust on your campus to build momentum and work through it in that way, that can be really meaningful. I hope it's been helpful to explore some of these things. I would love to take your questions. I've not been looking at the chat, but I will open that up now to see if there is anything in there, and welcome some questions. I
I'm on
cannot
mute.
hear you. There
I'm
we go.
on mute. Yeah, it's like first timer. I was looking, it looks like we did not have any questions come in through Vahuva, and I do not see any in the Q&A. So, I'm curious if maybe people will drop them in going
Yeah,
forward.
I want to say too, if you have access to the chat and you want to drop in there, I would love to hear from you what you feel like the biggest gap is for your campus as you look at this model for
So
complex change.
we do have a question that came
Great.
in, from Beth, and she said, I'd love to know if this works for both middle managers and for high level leaders.
Hmm. That's a great question, Beth. I really believe that it does. I mean, the scale is different, right? And sort of the maybe the range looks a little bit different in terms of a time frame. But I think it's incredibly valuable for individual offices and teams to look at a model like this and say that we have goals, right? Whether you might not have a 10-year strategic plan, right? But you have goals for the year, you have goals for your work. And to be able to say, are we really clear about where we're going? Do we all know, are we all equipped to do that work and work toward those goals? Have we aligned our resources in the best possible way? Do we know how we're going to get there? Have we really mapped out our pathway? And are we all really invested in it, right? Do we know what's in it for us, or do we all really believe in this direction? That can be a really eye-opening conversation, I think, to have with a team, and provide some shared language then too for you to talk about how you pursue those goals together. So I think
And
so.
I would add, I think the role of the middle manager is probably one of the most important roles because you are managing the up and the down. Whereas some are only managing up and some are only managing down, and you are constantly in that middle zone. Obviously, middle is in the name, but you are constantly, doing a dance on both sides. And I think that I agree that it is applicable. And we've got a few more
Yeah.
questions coming in, so this is fun. Okay,
Yeah, I
so
can see that. Can I add one more note there, which
yes,
is
of
to say that
course.
I agree with you completely that I think there are roles that sort of do that, what's the strategy that I'm
Mhm.
receiving institutionally and how do I translate that to students? But I think it's important for everyone to remember that presidents also manage up and down. Presidents are
They
managing up
do.
to a board. And boards are really challenging. That's like a whole other conversation that we could have. Boards are fabulous and interesting and a really unique, structure in higher education. And presidents have to do that really careful navigation all the time as well.
They do. That's such a great point. And they are all very different and certainly structured differently or appointed differently. And yes,
Hmm.
it's a whole nother space. So we've
Hmm.
got another question coming in from Carlos. Um, Trust and credibility both go hand in hand. What is your take if both are not in sync?
Hmm. It's an interesting question, Carlos. Trying to think about, um, to me, there's a little bit in that about this difference between being trustworthy or exhibiting trustworthy behavior, but not being trusted. I mean, I've really been doing a lot of thinking about this. Like, what's the gap between those two things? And I think you could say that that's credibility, right? That even if you are a trustworthy person, I mean, I will tell you, by and large, most of the leaders that I know are incredibly trustworthy people, right? Not all. I'm sure there are some exceptions. By and large, leaders care about their people. They care about their environment. They are really invested in doing everything that they can to make a campus successful, to make their students successful, but they're operating in environments that are incredibly complex. And they may enter into that environment as a trustworthy person, exhibiting trustworthy behavior, but not have credibility because of their predecessor, because of baggage in the environment. There's this, I've tried to draw this out and it's not a good, drawing at all, but it's like, so here's this trustworthy leader and here's this environment. And then there's this big pit of institutional muck in the middle, right? Just all of these things that exist in complex environments and build up over time. Our institutions have long histories, and there's a lot. There can be a really long tail to mistrust and to lack of
Mhm.
credibility. So as much as possible, I think my hope for leaders is that they can work to bridge that gap, and that campus communities will have the willingness to meet them halfway, right? To
Mhm.
sort of to put skepticism a little bit to the side and say, I want to genuinely understand what we are
Yeah.
trying to achieve here and genuinely try to engage with our leadership
Yeah.
to see how I can be a part of that and see how I can understand that. It's a big ask, I know,
It is
but
a big ask.
it's my
Yeah,
hope.
no, and I think credibility depends on the topic too. They might be very trustworthy and credible in one area, but others, it's not that they don't think they're trustworthy, but they may or may not trust their knowledge base or skill
Right.
set. And particularly in higher education, when you look at academia and status based on degree or
Mm-hmm.
expertise, and then
Mm-hmm.
being put into administrative roles and vice versa, it can be a very interesting environment. So
Mm-hmm.
that's such a great point.
It can, and I think that that brings up the notion too that in no circumstances should leadership be oriented around a single person. It's why teams are so important at any level, right? It
Yes.
should not be a one person show. There should be a group of people who have those sort of capabilities across a broad variety of areas that are bringing that to the table and speaking with an institutional voice. Right? The best cabinets that we know are all empowered to speak with institutional voice. And they do that from their area of expertise, but also because they're connected to that vision of the institution just as much as the president is.
Absolutely. All right, we've got another question.
Okay.
Alex is asking, what do you think is the first step to take when trust has been broken at an institution? How do you begin to repair it? What does that
Mm.
look like from your perspective?
I think you have to name it. I mean, I really think that it's hard to overcome some of these things if nobody's talking about them or if it's
Mm,
being talked about behind closed doors, right?
yeah.
Um, so I think even more so than, a campus sort of saying, well, I don't know, we're going to wait and see, what's happening up here, or a president with their leadership team behind closed doors going, I think we need to share some more information. Right? I
Mhm.
think being able to just be at the table and say, in order for us to do this really good, really important, really hard work together, we have to build trust. So let's talk about how we want to do that. What does that mean to us in this environment? How does that align with our mission, right? I mean, we all have missions. So who are we? And how are
Right.
we with an alignment to that mission really going to think about how we want to do this work together? Um, I think that surfacing the conversation is like half the battle. I mean, just put it on the table because it does not help anyone if it's behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And it takes a lot of courage to do that as
It
well.
does.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
It's an emotional exercise for sure for a lot of people involved.
It is.
Um, okay, so I'm keeping an eye on all the spaces, and I think that was the end of our questions for the session. So it was efficient.
It
And you
was.
covered a lot of really wonderful ground, Emma. So thank you very much for providing that for all of us. We truly, truly appreciate it. Um, I have a couple of final things that I'm supposed to say. First of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining. We are so thrilled that you all came to be a part of the Carnegie Connection 2024. Emma obviously has some really wonderful, she's got her LinkedIn profile. So please do make sure if you want to connect with her. I know she would be eager to connect with you. If you're interested in other free resources, Carnegie is posting all sorts of information all the time. We do lots of different webinars or white papers, or we conduct a lot of our own research, some of which was shared through some of our sessions this week. So please feel free to head over there for more insights. Our next event is in person, and it is the Carnegie Conference 2025. And that is taking place on January 15th and 16th at Disney World's Yacht Club and Beach Club, Yacht and Beach Club Resorts. For those of you that may be unfamiliar, as I mentioned, this event takes place in person. It's very interactive, it's inspiring. We bring in leaders and speakers from outside of the industry of higher education to help broaden our perspectives and helping us think about our work in a slightly different way. There's lots of actionable breakout sessions, as I mentioned, expert speakers, and we'll touch upon the marketing mix of traditional and cutting edge tools that can increase familiarity, stronger reputation, and meaningful engagement with your institutions. And last but not least, we would ask if possible for you to help us by filling out a quick post-event survey. This helps us think about events that we can plan for you in the future, how we can improve this, this event going forward. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to that shortly after we conclude this session, and would greatly appreciate anything that you have to offer. And so appreciate your participation today. Lots of great questions throughout the last few days, and certainly an MS session as well. And with that, I wish you all a very happy Halloween. That is today. Hopefully it's spooky and fun and some sweet treats in your future. So thank you again, Emma, and wishing you all a wonderful afternoon. Take care. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.